There we go. All right, well, we might go. All ready?
Yep.
Okay, let's go. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the SCLAA webinar, Leveraging ERP and Improving Business Value. My name is Stephen Lakey, and I'm the President of the Victorian and Tasmanian Division of the SCLAA, Supply Chain and Logistics Association of Australia. And I'd like to welcome you all. So whether you're a member of SCLAA or you're on a pay-per-view for today's webinar, a very big welcome. I'm sure you're going to get heaps out of this session. It's great to have David along with us today, David Oglevy. I've been looking forward to this webinar because I think it is such an important subject. An ERP investment is probably the biggest and most important, it's definitely software investment that a company can make. And I think history is littered of the train wrecks that happen if that decision isn't made correctly and if it all goes wrong. So if you're looking at ERPs or looking at getting the best value out of your existing ERP, or for that matter, any major software purchase like a WMS, a warehouse management system, or any major software purchase, I think the advice that David's got today will be very important. David, hello, you're switching in from sunny Queensland.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. And it's unfortunately not quite so sunny today. It's a little bit overcast, but never mind.
Well, I hate to say it, but Victoria's got a beautiful spring day today. So
we can get out.
This
with the way you guys are at the moment.
We've got 1 hour to enjoy it, but that's all right. Now, for the audience, a little bit of housekeeping. The Q&A will be done near the end of David's presentation today. So I'd love you to interact into this webinar. Put your questions in the Q&A box down the bottom of the screen, and we'll handle those at the appropriate time. So I'd encourage you to do that. If anything comes to mind, put them in that box there. All right, I will give the formal introduction to David now. So David has been a business owner and consultant for over 40 years, and it's been said that he's a superpower of ERP. David's focus is on ensuring executives improve their profitability by leveraging their investments in ERP and other technologies. David has a client base that spans the Pacific Rim, covering Australia, New Zealand, US, Vietnam, and Singapore. He was recently cited by a CEO of an ERP company as the best independent ERP advice in the business. He is also the author of the highly acclaimed book, The 14 Deadly Sins of ERP Implementation, which I'm happy to say I have read, and was one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to David today, because I think if anyone is thinking about changing their ERP, that is a must read. It's only a short book, but it's got some great advice in there and just flags those pitfalls. But for now, over to you, David.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. Well, as Stephen mentioned, my name is David Oglevy, and I provide advisory services to executives of companies of all sizes, from small family businesses through medium-sized privately owned companies, and I've even advised some ASX listed companies. So, and as Stephen said, my client base extends all over Australia and New Zealand primarily, but I have got clients in Vietnam, Singapore, and a couple in the US. I've been doing this for a long time now, probably since I started in 1998. So I've been operating for quite some time in this space. My key focus today is to provide a little bit of an insights behind the ERP industry and what it takes to be successful in this space. So let me just get my presentation up. And I'm hoping everybody can see that.
Yep.
Cool. So, I'd like to provide a little bit of a behind the scenes of the ERP system, the industry, highlight what it takes to be successful with an ERP system, and primarily how to add value to your business, because ultimately that's what we're all trying to achieve. Highlight what we need to be careful of, the areas where the landmines might be existing, And hopefully you'll walk away today being a little bit better informed, with a lower risk profile, hopefully, if you want to do this for yourself. So let's just quickly look at the ERP industry. Now there's bad news and good news. The bad news is globally about 75 to 85% of these things fail in implementation. And 60% of those can have some major business interruption. That is, you can't ship goods on the day that you want to go live. There's another statistic out there that says 70% of companies that experience a major IT failure end up not being in business 5 years later. So as Stephen mentioned, this is a very, very critical decision that executives need to make. And the bad news is that ERP can be challenging. But the really good news is we know the causes for all of that failure. They are avoidable. Done correctly, ERP can be painless. And more importantly, it can dramatically improve your business. Right, so the success in ERP really starts with selecting the right product. ERP failure is about a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not about one big thing going right or wrong. So the reality is it is never, ever about the actual technology. Success or failure in the ERP world is generally due to human behaviour. One of the reasons why that failure rate is so high is executives rarely do this. So a CEO or a CFO will probably do this once or twice in their career. And often it is, I go into environments where CEOs have actually delayed the decision to implement a new ERP system purely and simply because they are frightened of what reputational damage will be done if it goes badly on their watch. So with those decisions, the CEOs and the CFOs that do decide to go ahead, unfortunately, because it is not something that they've done many times before, there are no lessons learned from the past. They seem to go through the same rituals, the same behaviours that all of their predecessors do. And one of those is they just generally reach straight out to software vendors when they're starting to think about this. Now, unfortunately, due to the way the industry is structured, the amount of commissions that are available for salespeople, the integrity that may or may not be in the industry, this is a big mistake. So the old selection model is broken and we need a new way to do this. What do I mean by the old selection model? That is where somebody comes up with a really long list of detailed functional requirements that you send to the vendors. Often these contain very old redundant processes like, can your system run a batch job? These sorts of things. They have no real relevance to the technology that's available today. So a lot of consultants in the industry out there have been recycling all of the old ways for far too long. In fact, there have been some vendors that mentioned to me that some clients, they'll send the requirements list to them and it actually has somebody else's name in the list. So it's really important that we break that cycle and we get away from the old model. A new way is needed. So what is that new way? Well, the new way really is to focus on what makes your business different. What gives your business the competitive advantage that it either needs or wants to build? So from a ERP implementation perspective, as Stephen mentioned, I've written my book, but from a selection perspective, I've really got 13 tips about getting the selection right. The first one is, why are you doing this? What constraints is the business experiencing? Are you sure that a new system will help you overcome these problems? There have been many times when I've been called into an organisation on the premise that the system that they have isn't doing what they need it to do for them. Only to find out after we look for we look to why they're looking to change, what constraints there are. The reality is often they are not even leveraging the applications they have deployed properly in the first place. It is not uncommon for us to be able to make a dramatic business improvement simply by changing the way they're using their existing system. So while it's a simple question, it has a very deep meaning, and that is to really understand why it is you're looking to change. I would suggest that many executives and many companies don't really understand why. The system often gets blamed for a litany of other behavioural issues in the business. But let's say, for example, you do really need a new system. One of the key points for me is strategy before software. That is, where are we looking to be in the next 5 years' time or 3 years' time? What does this business look like, smell like, taste like in 3 years' time? Because we don't want to just solve today's problems. What we want to do is identify where your business is going to be in 3 years' time, what competitive advantages it's going to have, and how will a new system support and preferably enhance that competitive advantage. That is a really key conversation to have before you go to your software vendors and start talking about product. You need to understand why and where you are going to be. You need to be able to match corporate cultures. And the reason for that is, if you are looking to engage with a large bureaucratic global software vendor, there's a fair chance that the way they operate and the way they build their relationships and the way they operate on a day-to-day basis may not align with yours. If you are an agile business, you're ready to do things quickly, or vice versa, you need to make sure that your cultures are aligned. Because at the end of the day, it's not, as I said, it's not about the technology. The relationship between you and your software vendor is very important. The old adage is that it's a marriage. Right? You're going to be spending a long time with these people, and you need to be able to get on, and you need to understand each other's position, and more importantly, they need to understand your business. Internally, you also need to have a proven ability to get things done. All too often, a software vendor will come in to try and help you implement a new system. And you yourself do not have the ability to drive the projects the way that they need to be driven. You aren't able to get things done in the timely manner that the software vendor is expecting you to get done. I'm an old rugby man, and you can't expect to win an international rugby game if your team really is a second grade domestic side. At the end of the day, you need to be strong enough, capable enough, skillful enough to perform at the level that you need to. Now, you don't need to be an international side, but what you do need is to have a really good understanding of what your company's capabilities are and plan accordingly. That's the key piece. You can always develop people throughout the project using the right guidance and appropriate considerations, but you need to know where you are in the first place before you move forward. Another reason these systems go off the rails is because they try and eat the elephant at once. They try and do too much, too quickly, and a lot of that involves customization. So change management is a really key component of an implementation project. And that is to try and guide people away from having to make the new system look, perform, and behave like the old system. What I try and do with clients is to make sure that we understand the way the product is going to perform in a vanilla situation, in a condition. And that way we use the system for 6 to 8 or 9 months. And then we will really understand where the pitfalls are. where the real pain points are. Another key piece to getting the selection right is making sure that those who demonstrate implement. Software vendors have got a very, very skilled team in their demonstrations. So their sales teams are extraordinarily skilled at being able to present the product in its best light. They are extraordinarily skilled at being able to direct the conversation around the potholes and the problems that the product might have. They are very skilled at avoiding all of these so that you don't actually see these things in the demonstration. But by insisting that the person who is doing the demonstration for you actually be involved in the implementation means that the person that's there is making promises to you that they're going to have to implement. I don't know how often a new project will start, a new software vendor implementation team comes onto the client site, and we kick the project off, and not long afterwards the team starts to say, hang on, the product doesn't do that. Who told you it does that? One of the key ways to avoid that issue is to make sure that those who demonstrate implement. It is also important for you to hire consultants from the vendor. They've got a high level of expertise, most particularly in your industry. And actually, more importantly, hire consultants that have got their expertise in industry. ERP vendors tend to get their consultants from 2 or 3 main sources. They are generally financial people who have jumped the fence from industry into the software vendor. Or they get student graduates who get to understand, IT graduates who get to understand the product, but have very little skills or experience actually in industry. What you are looking for is someone who has got experience in industry, but understands the product, so that you can then make sure that it is configured and utilised to bring the best out in your business. All too often, the students or the financial people don't necessarily understand the operations of the business. And at the end of the day, it's the operation part of the business that generates the profit. Finally, don't select the latest version. There will be a lot of excitement, there'll be a lot of hype, and there'll be a lot of talk about what the new product can do and how sexier it is than the old system, and all of that sort of talk and quite frankly, rubbish. The reality is, software, when it's released, has bugs. And what happens is if you take on the new version, you become the unpaid testing organisation for the vendor. You need to make sure that the product that you purchase has been in the market, in use, under fire for at least 6 to 9 months. One of the things that I do differently when I do selections is I actually perform 2 rounds of due diligence. Now, the first one is around making sure that the vendor that we're talking to has got good industry experience. They're worthwhile spending the time to go through demonstrations with and engage on a full-time basis for the selection piece. You often find that I've had experiences in selections where we've gone all the way through the whole process, only to find out that when we then conducted due diligence, that they weren't getting very good testimonials from their client base. They weren't as shiny and as an expert as they've made out to themselves to be, and that the actual reputation in the marketplace isn't as strong as they would like you to think. It's really important to do 2 rounds. First one to clean out those that have got that situation in the first place. And then secondly, after you've got down to your two final choices to do a really in-depth due diligence and speak to the people in those companies that are providing the testimonials who actually use the product under fire. It's really important that you speak to users. Because the problem with the first round is you are often dealing with executives who have helped make the decision to go with that particular product. And at the end of the day, let's be honest, they have an ego to protect. They have got a reputation to protect. They chose this product. They're not going to turn around and say that it was a bad choice. And I have seen many times before where executives will go through the round of due diligence questions with their software vendor purely and simply because they just didn't want to admit that they'd made a bad choice. So it's really important that we try and flush that out. Another key component is making sure that you have a highly skilled person internally that can fill the role of a solution architect. The solution architect's role is to make sure that the overall configuration of the different modules and the different components of the system hang together correctly to deliver the actual solution that you are looking for. Many times before, clients will rely on the vendor's solution architect. And at the end of the day, the vendor's solution architect is there to get the project in, the invoices paid as quickly as possible. They are not there for your best benefits. So you need somebody internally who will own the solution. And this is a key point that I try and get across to all of my clients, is that you own this at the end of the day. So whether you're working with any of the big organizations, like the big consulting firms who are doing the implementation for you or to you, rather than you running the project yourself, at the end of the day, you own the result. So you need to be involved and you need to understand what's going on. You own this. You also need to make sure that all aspects of the business are included in the selection process and the implementation piece. This is not an IT department's project. This is not the financial system going in. Because at the end of the day, it is the operations where the profit is generated. So we need to make sure that people like yourselves in the supply chain, in the warehousing, in the transportation areas are heavily involved in these selections, because you know how the business actually operates on a day-to-day business, aspect under fire. All too often I see senior executives that will sit in these selection meetings and all that sort of stuff. They think they have an idea about how the business operates, but the reality is they don't, what they think happens in the business actually is completely different when you get on the ground and speak to people who do this on a day-to-day business for themselves. It's really important to have the whole business involved in this. Another potential landmine is licensing or subscriptions, as the current cloud models are providing. It is really important to understand the nuances around how the licensing model works. And that is because many of them these days are role-based. Now, unfortunately, each of the software companies will have a particular view on what a role does. And again, the disparity between what the software vendor thinks and what actually happens in industry in each different company, and even between companies, right? You might have the same title, but the actual work that they perform and the activities that they do and the tasks that they get done can be significantly different. And because of those tasks, that's how the licensing model can often work. So it is not uncommon for a client to find themselves in a substantial pickle and have a much higher license fee invoice come through purely and simply because of the roles and the tasks that they've assigned. So it is really important, particularly from a budgeting perspective up front, to know how the licensing model works, know how the roles are defined, and what tasks will influence a change in the per user price. Now that takes a lot of work to get right up front, because trust me, the software vendors don't make that easy to understand, but it is a critical foundational piece to get right. Otherwise you could fall on your face very quickly. The other piece of advice that the software vendors don't like me to give out, and that is to get sound legal advice early. And the reason for that is my advice is to never, and I mean never, sign a standard licensing agreement. I can assure you that the software vendors have not written that agreement with your best interests in mind. So to that end, I would make the suggestion that you go and get some sound legal advice from somebody who does software legal work as part of their business. But at a high-level domain area, I would suggest that you need to make sure that you have some productivity terms and agreements written into your agreements. Make sure you have some performance measures built in, so the tasks that the software vendor needs to perform and how you define a high or a low quality performance. They are very important concepts to get right, and if you're going to have an argument with your software vendor, it is best to have it up front. It is often that an independent set of eyes can actually help out here and call out any hidden biases that you might have, the unconscious biases that exist in just the day-to-day working and so forth. It is often worthwhile to have an independent set of eyes that will help you prevent you from breathing your own exhaust. So that's the selection piece, and that's the number one reason why ERP tends to fail, is you pick the wrong product for the business and you are constantly trying to fit a square peg into a round hole throughout the whole implementation. Whereas if you've got the fit right up front, the implementation tends to go a lot more smoothly. As I mentioned, I've documented the key points for the implementation in my book that Stephen was kind enough to give us a little wrap about, but so I won't go into each of the 14 because we don't really have that amount of time. But the key general points are, to get implementation right, everybody in the business, but more particularly the project team, needs to be accountable all of the time. And this gets back to that culture piece that I was talking about before. If you don't have a team that are used to having to be accountable for their actions and the results that they deliver, then your implementation runs a higher risk of going off the rails. You really need to dig into the real reason why a particular piece of functionality or a change is required. All too often, throughout the implementation phase, people will not be comfortable with how a piece of functionality is working. They want it to look like the old system. They want it to appear in the same position on the screen as the old system. There's a myriad of reasons why these things go off the rails. But if you don't understand why you want something, it needs to be business outcome focused. In today's agile world, if you like, there's a lot of talk about how the software deployment methodology called agile can be used. I would caution using, as I call it, the technique du jour, the technique of the day. Yes, agile will work for ERP implementations. I've successfully used it in implementations. But the one thing I've learned is that it's horses for courses. If your culture in your business doesn't fit an agile environment, if your culture doesn't fit a waterfall environment, neither of those are going to work properly. So getting back to making sure that the cultures between your organizations, between you and the software vendor are aligned. If you've got a vendor that has only ever delivered by a waterfall and you've got an agile company, you need to be extraordinarily careful. It's really important to get those cultures aligned. And this is one of the areas where that alignment is very important. I mentioned before, you own the result. You own this. All too often, executives and project teams expect a software vendor to implement it for them. The reality is, for you to get the best value from your system, the best value from your investment, and for you to reduce the amount of ongoing costs that you're paying the vendor, you need to build your capability internally. And you do that throughout the implementation part of the project. And I'll cover how you do that in a minute. But this building of internal capability is a key success factor. I would also suggest that you don't sign up to a full implementation up front, because once the software vendor has you on the hook, you're done. It's important that you have broken up your project into sizable chunks. You eat an elephant one bite at a time. Let's get some performance measures on the table. Let's see how we work together. Let's see how we perform together. So it may be that you sign up with your software vendor to only do the design session first. And then you just sign up for the next component, because you need to make sure that you have sizable pieces of work that have got a discrete time frame and a discrete cost to manage it. Otherwise, you run the risk of these things being over budget massively, over time, and costing an absolute fortune. And I think we've all heard the stories and the horror stories. I think it was Lidl in Germany, the supermarket company, spent something in order of 500 million euro before they canned the project. So that was just money down the drain. So when I talk to people about this, I'm often asked just to summarise it. So the top three areas that I talk about are, I mentioned company culture a number of times. That is absolutely critical. You need to understand what your company culture is and what the ramifications of that particular culture are. You need to understand what the software vendor's capabilities are, particularly the people that they're going to be putting on your project. And you need to understand your team's capability. I don't believe there's enough focus on these three areas done before you start. So if we quickly walk through these, the company culture, for example, is the project a key component to your overall strategy? I spoke earlier about making sure that the project would be able to deliver, if not enhance, new or current competitive advantages. This is why I often talk about having a strategic piece done before we go to the vendors, because that whole strategic analysis piece up front helps understand the why, helps understand the where we're going to be. Are your business requirements really well understood? And do you really understand how the business actually operates for real? Or is it a perception of some executives about how they think the business operates? We need to make sure that you know what you want. The company has to have an open communication environment, because we will come across difficulties. We will have challenges, and rather than having to hide these things, or open communication delivers the best outcome. But if your culture is not to be open in that nature, then we need to be aware of that and take steps to make sure that we have those things covered and not find them and fall into the landmine throughout the project. An ERP project is often described like having open heart surgery. So we need people to be able to make speedy decisions. There will be a myriad of times when the organisation has to make a decision between different options. It's the ability of the project team to communicate that to the executives and for somebody to be able to make a decision quickly and stick with it is very, very important. I've mentioned before about the importance of accountability and performance. That goes internally as well. The company needs to have a history of being successful in delivery, because if it doesn't, that's okay, but we just need to plan differently in order to help develop that capability. Politics is a huge killer of ERP implementations. You're often having one part of the business fighting with another. A full-time team, again, is another critical component or ingredient to success in this space. All too often, I am debating with executives about the ability for them to be able to backfill their team and to release these people to get this work done. There is no question that the fastest and the cheapest way to get these sorts of projects done is to have a full-time team. You need to carry the expense of a backfill. There is no quicker way to do it, and there is no cheaper way to do it. Having a part-time team will compound the problems. It will massively increase the timeline, and strangely enough, it is not cheaper. So if we now look at the project team's capability, you need to have, the key piece here is you need to have your best people on the job. You need people who are quick learners, that they embrace accountability, they've got an open mind and are willing to look at how the functionality of a piece of software can be applied to that business. It's really important that they aren't blinkered in their views. You need the best people in your company on the job, one from each department. And then most importantly, the software vendor's capability. I mentioned before about how you need to find people that have got industry experience. So you're looking for people who can quickly understand your business and have a deep understanding of the product and marry the two. You need to have people who are able to build relationships with your team. They obviously need to have a history of delivery as well. And they need to be strong communicators, because there are two things that happen in an ERP implementation. One is that the language in the business changes. And the second one is that the same terms can mean two different things, if not more, to different people. So strong communication is really important to make sure that the message delivered is what is received and understood. Because all too often, if we start using industry terms, there's a default position in somebody's mind about what that means. And that's not necessarily what is communicated. So it's really important to make sure that you have got good, strong communicators. So obviously the sweet spot is the area that we're looking to fill. So if we've got a very poor company culture, but strong vendor capability and strong project team capability, we've got a very high risk of a lack of adoption. If we don't have a capable project team, but we do have a strong vendor and the company culture is quite good, then we run the risk of not building that internal capability, and there is a constant stream from your bank account to the vendor's bank account. And clearly, if we've got no capability from the software vendor and they have no industry experience, then we run a high risk of getting it all wrong. So it's really important that we understand those areas. Some key things to avoid. The industry as a whole has tried to plug the history and the reputation of the industry about, costing a lot of money, high failure rate. They've tried to plug that hole or change the story by using fast track starts, starter packs, industry templates, all ways that sound really enticing. But the reality is that is nothing more than a vanilla base. Here's what you get irrespective of what your business does. So if every industry, every company in an industry was to use an industry template, you are all performing exactly the same. They do not really relate to your business. And that's the key piece, because we're looking to enhance that competitive advantage that you have. And trust me, an industry template or a starter pack or a fast track pack will not give you that competitive advantage. It makes you just like everybody else. Now, this one sounds odd. Demonstrations that don't demonstrate. Having sat through hundreds of different software demonstrations, I am constantly surprised at how many presenters will explain what the software will do under a particular business scenario that they're trying to explain, but not actually get the software to do it. So if you are actually in a demonstration, you make sure that you make the presenter do the work in the software and see the result. Don't let them tell you what the software will do. I mentioned before, demonstrators that don't implement. You must have those people in the implementation. It avoids all those issues that I mentioned before. Likewise, the standard legal documents we've covered. One constant cost that is regularly forgotten about is, where are the software vendors, consultants located? Where are their highly skilled people, the ones that have got all of the industry experience? They can tick all of those boxes, but where are they located? If you're in Melbourne, in Sydney, in Tasmania, and they're in Perth or in Brisbane, you'll have a significant travel and accommodation expense that was unbudgeted for generally. There are a myriad of projects that have been bitten on the backside with this one. So make sure that you understand where these people come from and what the travel and accommodation arrangements are. One skill or behaviour that is coming to the fore now with the new cloud options that are available is the need to regression test regularly. And this comes about because the software vendors are constantly, I should say, releasing new functionality. Right? So there's no upgrade paths anymore. They are now updates. So the cloud computing, software as a service arrangements allow them to deploy these new functional capabilities so much faster, so much quicker. But the issue there for me is, every time that you make a change to this software, it is good practice to make sure that it does not break another part of your business. And the software vendor cannot do this. So there are some vendors out there that are releasing on a monthly basis new functionality. So if you're going to stick to good practice, that means that every month you need to deploy this software in your test environment. You need to run all of your tests again to make sure that it's not breaking anything else. So this is a requirement that is not well understood and is certainly not being told by the software vendors. So, any questions?
Thank you, David. We've got a few here. There's one here. The pandemic has shone a spotlight on cloud solutions with some of the benefits there of accessing them out of the office. What's your opinion on cloud versus on-premise? What fits and where?
Okay, so that really comes back to various IT managers have different views on how they want to handle cloud. I don't think there's any doubt that cloud is very competent at improving mobility and those sorts of things. It is highly dependent on your bandwidth capability at your location, wherever you happen to be. So that works for some and not for others. It is possible to get that mobility through on-prem deployments. Again, that comes down to an individual preference of whoever is managing that component within your business. So, you know, I think cloud has become the platform du jour. It's certainly enabled people to work in lots of places they couldn't work before. The subscription model does worry me a little. You know, it's taking costs out of the balance sheet and putting into the P&L, and they are costs you rarely can get rid of. So once you've made the decision to sign up to that regular subscription, there's that regular hit on your P&L. So there's some give and take on both sides of the cloud argument.
Great, thank you, David. Another question here, how many vendors, minimum and maximum, should be selected for the vendor evaluation stage before we proceed with the finalisation of a vendor?
Well, I don't know that there's a magic number. I think it is wise to cast your net as wide as you can initially and do an initial cull early in the piece. That's one of the reasons why I do 2 sets of due diligence questions. But I think having done that and as long as you understand what your big whys are and what your competitive advantage is, it will become quite clear fairly quickly in conversations with those vendors about whether they understand the competitive advantage you're trying to enhance, and those that get it and those who don't. So no magic number, but as a general rule, I would often have 3 people in the final run in demonstrations and so forth, because you need to remember there's a trait in the software industry now where vendors are quite reluctant to engage with RFPs because, you know, it costs them a lot of money to respond to those things and be engaged with those things. So they are being more judicious these days about who they respond to and who they don't. So I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but I think the reality is no magic number. The good candidates will flush themselves out early, and then you can get serious with them on a functional basis further down the track.
Great, thank you, David. And there's a clarification question here, which I will ask you because other people may have the same question.
Sure.
Could you define what an agile implementation actually is?
Oh, agile. So that's where you're using tools like Scrum, Kanban boards, stories, epics, those sorts of things. So you're using tools like Jira or DevOps or Trello. Not sure if I'm answering the question here, but so the fundamental principle of Agile is small quantities more frequently. Because you've got to remember that Agile in software development actually came out of manufacturing, came out of the Toyota production system. So the Kanban boards, you know, they're like the Kanban cards in a manufacturing environment, same type of principle really. So it's about smaller quantities more frequently, whereas the waterfall approach is that you do your full solution design up front, you do all of your specification documents and everything is understood before you start. And then you do these things in big, large chunks and they take a lot of time. And then, decisions that were made 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago sometimes the problems with those decisions aren't flushed out early in the piece. So it's about, running configuration, small pieces of configuration. You do some testing on that and you make sure that it's behaving the way you want it to behave before you move on to the next piece. So it's delivery through smaller quantities more frequently.
Okay, thank you,
Does that
David.
answer the question?
I think it does, yes. A question here on inventory systems. Is it worth considering a separate WMS or go with the inherent system?
Well, again, that'll depend on your requirements and the capabilities. So, for example, there were some ERPs out there that had a massive hole a number of years ago that didn't have any warehouse management capabilities, and you needed to plug them clearly with best of breed. Some of those vendors have filled those gaps and either purchased another system and integrated it, or they've plugged a hole in one form or another. Whether that capability satisfies your requirement or not is another matter. So if you are a very big, high, fast-moving goods warehouse that requires, cubic optimization calculations and all of those other sorts of things that go on in the big warehousing operations, an ERP system generally will not be able to cater for that sort of thing. But if you are just a reasonable sized business that needs to be able to direct pick, direct put away, control the work in the warehouse to some extent, have location control, maybe have batch control, serial number control, those sorts of things, that can be in an ERP system. So I hate answering those questions with it depends, but the reality is it does depend on what your requirement is.
Just adding on to that, David, do you find that, and this is generally speaking, that the software vendors, ERP software vendors, have in-depth knowledge of inventory systems?
You want an honest answer?
Yeah.
No. I think you'll find that the software people generally have really good understanding of their software, which is why I was saying before, it's really important to make sure you understand who you are getting from the software vendor on your site. Where have they got their experience from?
Yep. All right. And we've got one last question for you, David, and it's more of a general question. How, if any, has COVID affected the ERP space?
Actually, it's made it busier for many of us, to be frank. I think a lot of companies have wisely made the decision to use the time and effort. They have a lot of people on JobKeeper and those sorts of things at the moment, and they are making good use of those people around doing things like some data cleansing activities before they kick off on a project, or they're taking the time to release those people to be able to do selections, those sorts of things. So it actually has, for me, made things busier. Is that
fantastic? Yes,
is that the angle they're looking for?
Yes, that makes sense to me. All right, so that's it for the questions.
Okay, so the last point I guess I was going to make is in the title we said, improving business value. And you may be thinking, well, you kind of covered a lot of things, but where's the improvement in the business value? And so if you've got an existing ERP system, what I would say to you is the same principles apply to leveraging your existing system. So when I go into a business and they've got a good system and they're just not using it properly, or they want to make better use of the system, I use exactly the same principles. Understand your why, be accountable, and all of those other points that I mentioned before. Right? You have your best people. Right? Use those same principles and identify where the big wins are for you, or where you want to improve in the business. An ERP system can turn the business into a money-making machine if it's done properly. It can be an absolute nightmare when it's not, but it can turn your business into a gold mine when it is. So to that end, I guess I'll just do a little quick sell for myself. some of the companies I've worked with include those guys. What I would also talk about is that I've devised what I call the ERP success formula, and that is a series of requirements and measures that I use to make a determination about really what your readiness is like to undertake an ERP project. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that sort of thing if that's what they were interested in. They're my contact details if I can help anybody in any way. So thank you for your time, everybody. I hope that's been of some use to you.
I think that was some great advice there, David. So thank you very much. If any of our viewers wanted to pick up a copy of your book, how would they go about that?
They can email me and I will send them one. Or it's on Amazon. On the slide deck, there was a link to Amazon, so it's just a cheap download. It's on Kindle or electronic version on Amazon.
Perfect. The 14 Deadly Sins of ERP Implementation. So there you have it.
That's it. Actually, I don't know if everybody can see me there, but that's it there.
I've got my copy
too. A little bit of product placement.
Well done. And thanks again for sharing your expertise, David, with the SCLAA membership. I do appreciate that. And for the audience, our next webinar is the critical importance of mentorship in supply chain. So that's going to be a great one because this isn't covered very often. It's going to be hosted by our very own Kyle Rogers. And a lot of you will know Kyle, very, very passionate about mentoring, particularly professional mentoring. So I'd encourage you to tune into that. That's in 2 weeks' time on Thursday, the 24th of September, same time. It's a lunch and learn at 12 p.m. So look out for that one. And thanks again. Until then, stay safe and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again, David.